Hello there, everyone, and welcome to Two Wise Guys. This is episode 9 for Saturday, October 7th, 2017. I'm your host, Dan, and this is my co-host, Chris.
Hey, everybody.
And we are broadcasting live. I'm broadcasting from Columbia, South Carolina. Chris is coming to you from the sunny and strangely humid Los Angeles, California. And we are back for season 2. So for those of you who haven't seen the update videos, we were gone for a while. We took some time off just to spend time with family and have kind of a summer break. But we're back now. And yeah, it's been kind of a long summer. Had a lot of stuff going on. So we're going to get into the discussion in just a minute, but just a little bit of updates for you guys. Last time we talked, we were talking about the podcast that we had it going on Stitcher and SoundCloud and a few other small ones. We finally got all the kinks worked out with Apple, so it's now live on Apple Podcasts. If you want to check that out, be sure to leave a rating and review. That'll help it move up in the rankings. And if you have any questions after this has been aired, we invite you to head over to twowiseguys.org/contact, and you can send us a message there. We also have a Two Wise Guys Twitter now. It's at Two Wise Guys Show. You can tweet us over there or DM us, and we'll join the conversation that way. And if you want to join the conversation during the show itself, you can also use the live chat right next to the screen here. And if you are on the Two Wise Guys site watching this, if you just click the little link that says episode 9, it'll take you over to YouTube where you can join the chat as well. But I think today we're going to do it a little bit differently than we have been doing it in the past. So rather than having the good, the bad, and the strange and all the layouts that we had before, we're kind of going with a more unscripted, kind of an unscripted episode. So if you've seen the unscripted shows before, it'll be kind of that same format. But if you have anything you want to chime in, we'll be watching the chat as well. So Chris, how have you been doing?
Doing good. It's been a busy summer. It was definitely much needed break from the show and from activities and stuff. Just when you have a family, I mean, Dan and I both have families, and it's just you're working full time, and you just sometimes you need to take a little break. So hopefully we can continue through to the holidays this time around, and we'll probably take a little bit of a break, I would imagine, at that time as well, and then get back to you guys in the early parts of next year. But it's good to be back. It's exciting just to back in the saddle and see what happens.
Yeah, it'll be a good time. So this has been kind of a crazy few months, and this last week has been insane. I'm sure everyone's kind of followed the news and seen what's been going on. We're going to kind of talk about the Las Vegas shooting and kind of the fallout from that in just a minute. But this is something I don't think Chris really knows about, but this is something I've been watching for a little while. That is kind of a big deal for me and for people that I hang out with. But for those of you who are not aware, the end of this year is we're going to be seeing the sunsetting of something called Section 702, and it's an authorization within the FISA order. So FISA is the Foreign Intelligence something or another Surveillance Act, I think is what it is. And it's basically part of the Patriot Act that was established back in 2001, which allowed the federal government to do foreign surveillance. So it allows them to collect data on people from other countries who are persons of interest, if you will, for different types of security issues. And but a big problem with that has been that it's also been bulk collecting data on American citizens, and the authorization for that is going away at the end of this year. But right now there's a bill that's being introduced into Congress to extend that authorization until 2023, and it tramples over our rights to privacy, and it's basically just shreds up the Fourth Amendment completely. So, Chris, have you heard anything about this?
I have not, but I do know about the Patriot Act, and I'm aware of some of the details of that with just the surveillance and everything that it entails. I'm not very well versed on it, but definitely am aware of it. So 702, is that, you're saying that's a continuation, or is it sort of like a replacement?
Well, 702 was the original authorization that was given in the FISA order, or in the FISA Act. But what they're doing is these provisions all have timelines. They have a certain end date, and then they have to be extended before that date ends. And so what's going on now is that Section 702 is coming to an end, and so they're aiming to replace it with this thing called the USA Liberty Act. And they have this weird tendency within Congress, whenever they want to pass something like this, to give it some super patriotic name like the USA Patriot Act, and kind of gives you the feeling that you're not really a patriot if you don't support it, even though it's detrimental to the Constitution and to our civil liberties. Then there was the Freedom Act, which replaced it once my hero Rand Paul filibustered and caused it to run out. So then they had to replace the Patriot Act with the Freedom Act, and now they're trying to basically paint this this reauthorization of 702, which allows mass surveillance and bulk collection of Americans' data, as a Liberty Act. So it's just a play on words, I guess, but it's just something for us all to be aware of. If you're a liberty-loving American, you actually care about your civil liberties. For what it's worth, I would recommend you contact your senators and your representatives and ask them to vote no on these provisions. So I'll have links in the show notes for all this stuff too, because I think it's important. But I know a lot of people don't seem to care because there's always this trade-off about freedom and security. Like, we can have freedoms but without security, or we can have security and have to sacrifice freedoms. And I just feel like it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I feel like there's solutions that can be found that don't require us to give up our civil liberties in order to have some level of freedom. And I think that's kind of a theme that we're going to be probably talking about as the show goes on. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for this right now, and it's saying that there's this little section called Acts Amended, and it says Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and then it says USA Patriot Act, and then it also says Protect America Act of 2007. How are those related, or is this sort of a modification of those?
I'm not exactly sure about all the details of it. I'm pretty sure that the way it works, if I'm not mistaken, is that the Patriot Act came about after 9/11 as a way to give special powers to the government to help combat terrorism. And I'm just going on a spitball here. I'm guessing that the original provision probably ran out in 2006 and had to be renewed for 2007, ran out in 2007, had to be renewed there. And so it's probably running out now, so they're going to try and extend it again into 2023.
Oh, okay. I'm looking here. There's some interesting details. Maybe I can just read them off, and maybe we can talk about one or two of them here. Let me just screen share this so you guys can see it. This is just straight from Wikipedia. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just reading right here, kind of zoomed in a little bit. It says is subject to several limitations. Section 7, subsection 702, may not intentionally target any person known at the time of acquisition to be located in the United States. Huh. So does that mean that they can't target anyone in the United States, or it says may not intentionally target? So is that like creative verbiage there?
Yes. So the reason that it says intentionally is that they're not allowed to intentionally target American citizens for these things. The F in FISA stands for foreign, so it has to be someone foreign. But the thing is that usually if the American government is interested in somebody as far as foreign stuff goes, those people are usually in contact with somebody in this country. And as far as I understand it, the way that it works is it authorizes them to be able to to pull records and pull data on not just the person under investigation, but also on their contacts, some of whom maybe even be in America. And it also allows them to then proceed to kind of branch off and see, like, okay, well, let's look a little bit deeper into this person. Okay, who are their contacts? So that opens it up to more people. And I believe there's some, like, the 702 authorization also had something to do with the NSA's PRISM program that they were doing, which was the mass collection of all the data and all
so that
stuff.
Sort of makes it unintentional. So any data collected by PRISM, because it is intentionally collected, but it's not targeted at a specific person. So they can, I would guess, anything collected by PRISM would be able to circumvent these rules because it's not specifically targeting. Because it says may not intentionally target any person, but it doesn't say anything about bulk collection of data. Here's another interesting part right here. It says, may not intentionally acquire any communication as to which the sender and all intended recipients are known at the time of the acquisition to be located in the United States. That sounds sort of like it would be wiretapping or just picking up of people's like electronic communication as well as their mail, or is that, am I off there?
I'm not an expert in all of this, but I mean, it's funny you use the term wiretapping because that's what got Trump in so much trouble, just a few months ago.
Actually, wiretapping was mentioned up here too. It says there's a Wiretap Act right up here. It prohibits any person from illegally intercepting, disclosing, using, or divulging phone calls or electronic communications, punishable by a fine or up to 5 years in prison or both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but see, the thing is that a wiretap specifically targets an individual. Like, you're tapping an individual or a company's phone lines, whereas if you're doing bulk collection, especially now, like so many businesses in particular, like they're not using landline phones anymore. They're using VoIP technology. So it's not tapping a wire of a
but it's the same concept, though, right?
It's generally speaking the same concept, but because laws and regulations don't change the way technology does, it falls under a different jurisdiction. Really? As far as I understand it. I could be mistaken. I'm not a lawyer, but because VoIP is voice over IP or internet protocol, so it's basically it runs your telephone calls through the internet, whereas a phone line will run it over the telecommunications power lines.
Sure, but if I have for example, I have AT&T and I have a phone number local, to my area code, that's not voice over internet. That's not VoIP, is it? That's actual, it's not a landline, but it's an actual phone number, or is that considered VoIP?
Are you talking about a cell phone?
Yeah.
That's a whole different program altogether. If you're using a,
I guess what I'm trying to see is would that be considered wiretapping or related to that?
I don't know. I think that would probably be covered by the Wiretapping Act, because it's not going over the internet; it's going over a cellular network.
Okay. So, like, basically, our cell phone conversations, etc., should not be wiretapped. At the end,
but they are, because this I remember. I need to look it up. I can't remember what it's called, but there was a program that came out, and I think it was 06 or 07, and the telecommunications companies like AT&T and Verizon and them, they were actually building in essentially back doors into their network, so that way the federal government could get in and gather all of those phone calls. And it was a big scandal when it came out, and they said it ended, but all of these things, it's always interesting because these programs never actually end. They just get their names changed and they continue under a different agency. So for instance, like the mass collection of data, which was PRISM, was part of the same project that involved the phone companies, where they collected the phone records, and now it's all these different things are getting interconnected. And I don't know about you guys, like in California, but out here we have security cameras popping up everywhere. Like even in our neighborhood, there's these little boxes with all these cameras poking out everywhere.
Wait, where are these? Like, are they on telephone poles, or where are they located? I've never.
No, they're on like little 6-foot poles sticking out of the ground, different places around town.
On the side of the street, or on the sidewalk?
Yeah, sidewalks, sides of buildings. We have 2 in our neighborhood here. They usually
neighborhood, in a private neighborhood. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's meant for security, obviously, because it's they tend to put them in areas that have I don't necessarily want to say higher crime, but higher possibility of crime, and because we don't have a lot of crime in our neighborhood, but occasionally someone's car gets broken into, but that's just about anywhere, but anyway, they put them up so it's basically got like 5 cameras sticking out of this one little box, and they're usually under the jurisdiction of the Columbia Police Department. And but it's interesting because all these different things keep popping up. And there was a program that I remember studying in high school when I was doing a government program, research paper for. I was working on a project on DARPA, and they had this program back then that had been announced and released called Total Information Awareness, which then later changed its name to Terrorist Information Awareness. And it was this program where they would collect basically as much data as they could. It was supposed to build a database of people's their personal information, facial recognition, retinal scanning, DNA information, surveillance video from different, surveillance cameras around everywhere. And it was all tied, it had all your information tied in there, so they could pull up, if they caught a picture of somebody who was, trying to flee the scene of a crime, they could actually pull the picture of the security camera of the guy's face, scan his face, and it pulls up all of his information. They could freeze his assets and things like that from there. But this was, back in the early 2000s, like 2002, I think is when it was when I did the project. But these things, they never really end. They just kind of morph and change, and they go into these different things. But this is like a whole other can of worms. But the whole point of bringing this all up was mostly just to talk about, this upcoming vote. I think it's important to at least make the effort of telling your congressman to vote no on it, because it's important that they uphold the Constitution, that they uphold our, our civil liberties and our rights to privacy. I mean, even because like, we're not doing anything wrong. It's just there's nothing wrong with wanting some privacy,
Yeah, definitely. I honestly, I wasn't aware of this until you brought that up to me just before the show, and then just looking into it, I didn't realize it was even in any way connected to the Patriot Act. But as it relates to like the Fourth Amendment, which just, is obviously, prohibits unreasonable searches and stuff. For those of our viewers who don't know, unreasonable searches and seizures. Does it sort of circumvent those things? Because I've heard and read different things about, because you mentioned FISA earlier. I've heard different things said about it and read different things about FISA where it seems like they can be above the law or can be above these Fourth Amendments due to technicalities or due to emerging technologies. Like you mentioned VoIP, which is not emerging anymore. It's been around, but sort of like taking advantage of the fact that it's an emerging technology, not necessarily, it's a frontier technology, basically, not necessarily covered by existing laws or civil protections. Is that true, that FISA is able to circumvent those things?
Yeah, I mean, it lacks legal precedent, and so there's no real, as far as I understand it, there's no real, understanding of what exactly, like 30 years ago, we knew what it meant to say that you couldn't search somebody's stuff. You couldn't go in, because you'd have to go to their house, you'd have to go to their office, you have to go to their vehicle or whatever, and you'd have to manually search that stuff. Whereas now, with all this bulk collection going on, like how many people don't even use local storage on their computers anymore? They're using cloud storage. Like, do you need a warrant to search my files that are stored on Google Drive or on, on a remote server somewhere else? Because it's technically not it's my intellectual property, but it's not stored on my physical property.
And it all depend. That would, I guess, depend also on the sort of fine print, those huge disclosure agreements that you click whenever you subscribe to one of those services or any service that you do now. There's so many user agreements that you never look through it, but I'm fairly confident that most of those user agreements effectively they're there to protect the company from us, the users, in the first place. And also, I mean, my mind goes back to Facebook. I think it was several years back when basically, and they changed the user agreement to where any material such as images that you posted effectively became their property and could be used at their discretion for things like advertising and whatever, at their discretion. So my mind goes back to that sort of a thing, but obviously in the lens or in the frame of these user agreements with the cloud storage and everything, where I'd have to look into it, but I think it's pretty safe to assume anything that is stored on those servers or those hard drive cloud servers effectively becomes their property, right? I mean, or something along those lines.
No, I don't. And with cloud storage, it's a bit different because Facebook is, it's a social media platform, but essentially it's an advertising firm at this point. And so its whole purpose is to gain new users so that they can have a new source of advertising revenue. And one way to do that, there's a reason why you can go to a random website and then all of a sudden you get a you go to a website and it's got a little Facebook likes section on the bottom of it or on the side of it, and it's got the like button, and it's got like little faces of people on there, and then you look at like the first couple of them and you're like, hey, I know those 2 people. How does it know that people that like that page? Because it's all connected and it's checking your cookies, and it's all kind of interconnected. So, but with cloud storage, things like Google Drive or Dropbox or things like that, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's the same concept. Like those platforms don't own those documents because you're using a service, if that makes sense.
Well, they don't own the rights to it. So for example, if you're putting up work research or research for an intellectual property that you want to start, yeah, they definitely would not own that. You're just using their service.
Right.
But I guess what I'm saying, I guess maybe I should have worded that better. The information that the user is storing on those services is able to be searched and tracked and whatnot at the discretion of those companies. In other words, they have access to that. It's not necessarily your private information. If they wanted to view it, they could. Or if they wanted to allow a third party, such as, I don't know, the FBI or something to look at it, I'm fairly certain that sort of information, that sort of thing is covered in those user agreements. For example, like if there's a criminal that needs to be tracked, they would use that as an excuse to be able, to search that individual's files if there's any incriminating evidence. Maybe somebody who's a child pornographer or something is storing a lot of that stuff, and now they have jurisdiction to be able to go into that person's stuff. And who's to say what is a good enough reason for a company such as a cloud storage company or what have you to access your information? Because I'm fairly certain they could invent an excuse, any kind of excuse to view your stuff or do whatever. There's no real privacy, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Well, you should never expect privacy on the internet. That's the big number one rule. If there's something that you don't want to be accessible to somebody, just don't put it on the internet. Which is why, like you brought up, Facebook changing its policies to be able to say that they owned all the material that gets put on their site. There's a reason why you guys haven't seen any new pictures of, our family and the kids on there since like that happened, because I don't, it's my pictures and my family. I don't think that Facebook should have the right to own those things. So I'm like, you've got whatever is already on there, but I'm not going to put any more stuff on there. I know some people who store they store images of their passport, passport pages or whatever, and their driver's license, social security, just so they have copies of it that are readily available that they can send to people. But that stuff's out there. It's on somebody else's server. It's not on your own computer. That stuff, they can access it. Usually you have to read the license agreement to see what the company does. Like some companies, they encrypt it in a certain way so that way they don't have access to it because they don't want it. It's a legal liability that, like you brought up the idea of child pornography, that, if one of those awful people have stuff stored on their servers and they have access to it, then yeah, they're going to release it, especially because if they get a subpoena from a court. But, if I remember correctly, the San Bernardino shooter, the reason why Apple wasn't giving over like the decryption key and everything to get into the guy's iPhone was because they didn't have it. They don't store that stuff on a remote server. They store all that stuff on the iPhone itself. So there are some companies that are better about it. They don't want to have access. Like there's a company called DigitalOcean that I like, that you can spin up remote servers on demand to use for whatever you want to use it for. You could host a WordPress site or something on it, and you're paying for that server, so you own that server for the time that you're paying for it. So it's not one of those things where they're gonna, I'm sure that there's some administrator who can get onto it and get something if they needed to, but usually with a lot of those services, you just kind of use it however you want to use it, and they don't have access to it. But I'm not sure exactly like how Dropbox or something like that would work.
Be interesting to read their user, or at least skim through their user agreements. But taking this a step further, as you were just mentioning those details, it also made me think about, you talk about anything that you want to remain private we shouldn't be hosting online or putting out there in any shape or form onto the internet, whether it's through cloud storage or social media. but my mind was immediately drawn to the obvious issues that and vulnerabilities to hacking. So, and my mind, I immediately went to Experian, or was it Equifax? Was it? I think it's Equifax, because and everybody's information is up there, because anybody who has a social security number is going to be tracked by that company. So there's really nobody that was, even children. I would have to think, anybody who has a social security number, they immediately were put at risk by these hacks. And that Equifax responded and basically gave us, I don't know if you saw this, but I got like a free thing for credit monitoring and all that stuff. And so you can do that. It's like up to $1 million or whatever. But the vulnerabilities of said information that gets uploaded to, people who have nefarious intentions is very real. What are your thoughts about using things to sort of, or or would this even help to use something like a very strong password? For example, like a 30-character password that's just like a bunch of digits, a bunch of jumbled up words. Does it help at all to use like something like that rather than like a password that's a little shorter and easier for somebody to remember?
Yeah, it's always better to have a longer password, but it's not about length; it's about entropy. So you need it to be as close to random as possible, and so it's not even like, you could, short of like just like banging on your keyboard with your whole fist like a bunch of times in a row in different places and then kind of writing it down, like for instance, okay, so just from my understanding of the best practices for security and internet security and things like that, and not privacy, but remaining secure online. One is have strong passwords is one. So there are pseudo random password generators that are out there, and you can get them if you're interested. I would recommend going to it's grc.com. It's Gibson Research Center, and they're really, really good. Steve Gibson's like my hero as far as security stuff goes, and I'm a nerd and I listen to his podcast every week. It's like 2 hours of network security talk, and it'll be really boring for anyone who's not interested in it, but I think it's pretty fantastic. And I'll have links to the show notes to this stuff too, but he's got tons of resources on there, and it's all like his nonprofit stuff. He has a few things that he sells, a few programs and stuff if you're interested in buying it, but most of his stuff's on there for free, just for the good of the internet, which is great. But it's about having a strong password. So like, for instance, I have a strong password that, like, my master password for LastPass is, I think it's about 34 characters, and it's all pseudo random. So it's like, I just had to memorize this one really complicated password, and then, but every other password is also pseudo random generated, but it's all input into my password manager. But you don't want to rely on that solely. So what I have is I have a notebook that I keep all my passwords recorded in, a physical paper notebook that I write all my passwords down in, and then I keep that sealed up in a bag and stored away in my safe. Just that way I have a physical copy if I ever need to get back into them and I can't for whatever reason. But it's not just out and about where anyone can come stumble upon it and get into all my stuff. That's kind of your entry-level best practice for doing that kind of stuff. And always log out of your stuff. Like, a lot of people leave them signed in and leave that checkbox that says "Remember me" on there, and that's just kind of a bad idea.
Okay, so using like this Experian, or excuse me, I keep saying Experian. Sorry, Experian, if anybody watches this, it's Equifax. But using this as an example, how would using a stronger password benefit someone in that situation, or would it benefit?
It benefits them because it helps me be more resistant to what we call brute force attacks. And a brute force attack is it's a type of cyber attack where somebody basically guesses your password. So the number one overused password, which is completely insecure, obviously, is password. Another one is 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Another one is 1 2 3 4 5 6. Other ones are 6 5 4 3 2 1. things like that. Very basic ones. For the longest time, one of the most commonly used passwords was monkey, of all random things. I knew a guy whose password was puzzles. I guessed that one in like 2 seconds because I'm like, yeah, he likes puzzles. Let's see. Yep, it's puzzles. And so brute forcing is a means of just guessing a password. Now, the most basic way of doing that is somebody sits down at a computer, tries to log in. They have your email address, and so they're trying to log in and guess your password. So the best thing to fight that is for a website to have to lock your account after a certain amount of attempts. So if you ever like forgotten your password and then gotten locked out of an account, that's why. But when more advanced people are not going to be using just trying to guess your password. They're going to be using programs which are specifically designed to guess your password over and over and over and over and over. And so that's where entropy comes in. If it has a word in the password, like an actual word of the English language or whatever language you speak, that makes it that much easier to guess because it pulls from the dictionary as well. Whereas if it's a bunch of pseudo-random numbers and letters and symbols and everything all together, even if it's just 8 digits, it's intrinsically harder than if you were to have like a sentence from a book as your password. Even if that password ends up being 40 characters long because it's a series of words in the logical framework, it ends up being easier to guess. Whereas if it's like, even if it's 8 or 10 random letters, symbols, numbers, it's not a great length, but it's still incredibly difficult for even a computer to guess that password than it would be to try and guess a 40-character sentence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I guess just more personal, what about if you use, so you're using words, but you're using like 5 or 6 random words separated by like a symbol, like symbols such as like a period or dashes or things like that. So you're using multiple words and it's separated by symbols. Does that because I know that those type of passwords are easier for somebody to remember, but I would think that that's also difficult for one of those whatever you were calling it to guess, because it's got multiple words and it also has symbols that it would have to guess as well.
Right. The symbols help if you're going to do something like that, which it's not really recommended to do that, but if you're going to do it, then the symbols definitely help. Little things like replacing an S with a $sign or capitalizing, occasional letters and things like that. Really, the big idea is that if you want ease, you're gonna lack security. But if you want security, it's usually gonna lack ease, and you gotta kind of find that balance and that happy medium to where it can be usable, but it's also not be completely vulnerable to anyone being able to just guess your password and get through.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have one more question, and I guess we could probably move on. But this is just such an interesting topic to me, and you are very well versed in this. So, but my last question is regarding like password managers. I know earlier you mentioned a specific password manager that you use. So obviously you feel that there's some level of safety in those. My question though is, given the fact that everybody's vulnerable to attack for like a hack or something like that, every company or every website, how vulnerable are these password managers to an attack like that? And if they were to be compromised, would everybody's data just get out, like all their passwords just get out?
Well, hopefully they're being responsible and not storing everyone's data in just like one centralized database. That's the first key, is to kind of have it decentralized. Plus, it depends on how long. If their firewall was breached and somebody was able to get into their network, it would depend on how much time that person had before they were detected and kicked out. So if they were in there for they managed to get in and then got kicked out after, 5 seconds, they probably didn't get too much. But if they managed to be in there for, 2 or 3 hours, there's quite a bit of information they could get out of there. But I mean, there's no surefire way to stay safe online, because ultimately there's always going to be someone smarter and better at getting through your stuff than you are at protecting it. I like the password manager, and it took me a while to adopt to it because I had that same concern. I didn't really trust them. I feel like I don't want to have one centralized. It does create a single point of failure, which is always what you want to avoid. Which is why I have the backup of my notebook with all my passwords written down in it. So that way, if something like that did happen, I could go into my individual accounts and reset the passwords manually and not update my password manager. And that way, okay, my password manager is broken now, but no one's gonna be able to get into my stuff. I mean, there's ways to make it safer that are overly complicated and technical that I'm not going to get into right now. But I mean, if you wanted to be like the absolute most safe you could possibly be, you could create a file to house all your passwords. You could then encrypt it on your hard drive, and then, you know, have an open source program like I think it's called OnePass or KeyPass or something like that. And then manually upload those passwords into that as they're encrypted in that way, and then decrypt it into there. But it's overly complicated for everyday users. I think the best thing to do if people want to stay secure online would probably be just, one, be careful about what you're doing, so that way you're not giving all your information away to everyone and their mom. Like, you don't need to sign up for every cool looking account out there. Two, you just need to have a good password. I would recommend using a password manager. And that way it's kind of, you have it all in there, but that way you only have to remember one really hard password. But that's kind of my idea.
Well, that makes sense. That makes me feel better too, because that's one of the concerns that I've had more recently, just with all of these, breaches in security in different companies. And then now with this Equifax one, where it's one of those companies that you would not expect it to happen to. I think more so than other companies, I guess, would be. So that was a little bit eye-opening for me to see something like that. I mean, you hear about government websites being hacked, and you're kind of left wondering like how secure they really were.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's something like this, where it's dealing with people's very like with their social security numbers and a lot of like very valuable identity information, it definitely raised my eyebrows. And so it's good.
Well, it's like it's a data storage center. It's like you have one job, which is to protect the data that you're housing, and they couldn't even do that right. Not only that, the person who was administering their security, their login and credentials were admin, and the password was admin.
So that's what part of how they got in?
That's part of how they got in. Yeah, the person they had running their network security had no background in network security whatsoever. Like, why that person was in charge of their security, I have no idea. But the network was not secured in the least bit. There's no excuse for it. And frankly, 1 year of credit monitoring followed by a subscription that you're going to have to pay if you want to maintain that credit security is completely, to me, it was completely an inappropriate gesture, because it's like, okay, great, you're doing a little bit here to make it better, but now you're going to say, okay, but once your subscription's up for the year, you're going to have to pay us money to continue monitoring, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And I'd actually, wow, that's pretty insane. That was another detail I didn't know about this, but that just seems kind of arrogant to have your be a network security administrator and your password and your login or admin. That's like the biggest no-no. I wonder if that's like a case of like, just kind of feeling super secure and yourself and like, nobody will ever get to this, or nobody will ever get to me, or just thinking you're untouchable somehow.
Well, yeah, I mean, people.
I could think if somebody would do something like that which would essentially compromise millions of people's personal data.
Well, I think it's just a false sense of security. It's something that we all fall into as well. Like, how many of us just go out on the internet and start, messing around and stuff, and we're like, don't keep our antivirus stuff, up to date, or don't pay any attention, and you just start clicking on different websites. You're doing reading or research on a project or something, and all of a sudden you have a virus, and you're like, oh crap, I didn't back myself up. I haven't got an antivirus, and now my computer's locked up, and it's all because we don't think it can happen to us.
That brings up another question. Sorry, but when you're talking about antivirus, so I typically don't use anything like that. And I want your opinion on this, because I wonder if this is true, and I think you have a feeling what I'm going to ask. But I'm an Apple user, so I have all these Apple products, and then there's sort of this idea that, or I don't know where it came from, that Apple products are not invulnerable to hacking, but that there's not as many, what do they call that, malicious things out there, and it's harder to do anything to an Apple because of the way the system is organized and compartmentalized. Is that true to some degree, or is that just completely false?
Mostly true. Okay, so first thing to differentiate here, you use the term hacking, and when you're talking about viruses and malware, that's not hacking. That's just malicious software. Hacking would be like somebody actually, like, I mean, you could hack. You could open up your terminal and your MacBook or whatever you're using, and you could start typing in bash commands, and you'd be hacking. You know, it's something. It can be very complicated. It can also be very easy. You know, like for instance, I'm typically a Linux user. Full disclosure, I'm using Windows right now because I'm trying to relearn Windows for my exams coming up. But you know, on Linux, if I tried to play a video that was in a weird format that I'd never seen before, and I had to install some new codecs and stuff, and it wasn't really working right. There was a bunch of issues I was having with it, so I had to go into the command line and start, you know, changing some configuration files and stuff, and that's hacking. It's very, you know, hacking gets a bad name because of all the press that it gets about, you know, people breaking into accounts, but hacking can be good or bad. It's not necessarily an either or, it's a both and. But to answer your question, Windows is typically more vulnerable to viruses and Trojans that come in and rootkits and things like that, because it's got such a prevalent market share that most people are going to develop malicious software for Windows as opposed to Mac or Linux. I think the last thing I saw, Linux has like 4% market share of the desktop environment. Mac has, I think, 6%, and then Windows has the rest. So it's got way more Windows desktops out there than anything else.
Is that due to, because I feel like a lot of people I know use Macs, and obviously that's very subjective, but at the same time, is that because a lot of institutions use PCs, so that's why there's so many more PCs, partly why there's so many more PCs than there are of other systems such as Linux and Mac?
Yeah, they use, oh, got a little echo there. Yeah, I've got a lot of Windows, and like Windows is really heavily used in the enterprise, and so it's a lot of places you go. You always, if you go to, next time you go to a business, for instance, if you go to a car dealership or you go to a library or wherever you go, look at the computer. You'll be able to tell if it's Windows or not, and you know, by the taskbar on the bottom there. So odds are about 90% of what you're going to see, if not a little bit more, are going to be Windows computers. Now, what you're not going to see is the server on the back end that's running everything. And oftentimes, actually, the majority of the server side of things is actually running Linux, surprisingly enough.
That would explain the 4% being so close to Apple's, probably.
Yeah. So, well, Apple is great for developers. It's great for you know, artists and people like that. And like, you know, my wife, your sister, she uses a Mac. Mostly, I think, because she just wants to be able to use it and do her thing, and I don't want to have to deal with viruses. And so we inherited a MacBook, and so she uses that. Typically, if I have any problems on Linux, I can fix it myself and not have to worry about it. But Linux isn't very widely used. It's more used in Europe and other places around the world where it's hard because it's free. You know, you can install it on any old hardware you have. But yeah, the main reason is that it's heavily used in the enterprise, so people can hack into it and they can infect it with things. And you know, it might get a virus, which then allows another piece of malicious software to get into the network itself and infect the server, and then infect all the other computers and steal data or you know, collect information as it comes in and things like that.
Cool, man. This has been really educational to hear you just explain a lot of this stuff. For those of you who don't know, Dan has been working on, you know, a lot of, I guess, what you're going to classes or you're going to school, and part of your focus is involving cybersecurity. Is that right?
Yeah. Right now I'm taking some exams for A+ certification, which is basically fixing hardware and working with operating systems. Network Plus, which is basic networking stuff. Cloud Plus, which is cloud computing, and then I'm going to go into network security.
Cool, man. Well, that's, like I was saying before, that was very educational, and it's good to yeah, I feel better about using, because I typically use a password manager for my stuff, and I usually use like random characters and whatnot. You know, as long as I try to use, you were saying length didn't matter, but I typically try to use as long a password as I can, just because, you know, you got a password generator, you might as well, you know. And then,
well, no, don't get me wrong. Length is good. It's good to have a long password. It's good if it's long. It's good if it's good if it's short and random. It's good if it's long, but it's logical. But if you can get it to be like long and almost random, then you're in really good shape. I mean, there's I saw a password that or I tested a password, and not one that I'm using, but it's one that I just kind of thought up of, and it was almost completely random. It had a few phrases in there, but I intermixed some of the letters with characters and symbols and stuff. And I tested it to see on that GRC website. Actually, it's a page called Password Haystacks, and it tells you, like, based on the entropy of your password, how long it would take, like a computer that was designated just to brute force passwords, how long it would take to break it. And I think it said like 94 years or something like that. So it's like, that's a good password.
wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to find this stuff.
Cool, man. So let's move on to I know you wanted to talk about, we're unscripted here, but there were a few topics that we wanted to talk about, and one of them was this section 702, and we sort of segued into cybersecurity, and I think that was really cool to get there, because it was really informative for me, and I'm sure for at least some people in our audience. So, but I do want to, there was one other topic we wanted to talk about, and that was just regarding the recent events that took place in Las Vegas. And our hearts are definitely go out. Our thoughts and our prayers go out to the families and those who were affected by this, you know, this act of terrorism. Really, what it is, and it hit a little close to home for me. Just I have a friend who has a friend who was killed there at work, from work. So one of my work friends knew someone that was actually killed there at this event, and so, you know, just it you know, maybe it made me think about it a little bit more than, you know, normal, just because that's, you know, you're you know, just hearing that kind of a news is very troubling. So you know, and then I think I want to get your take on this, Dan, but my perspective initially was obviously sadness for those people who were affected, and just, you know, wondering what kind of person would do this, or persons, if that turns out to be the case. But I guess my thoughts afterwards sort of drifted towards, like, wow, how is this gonna affect, you know, our daily lives moving forward. And I almost immediately thought about the type of security that we see in airports and in different areas where there's passenger travel that's international. You typically see a heightened level of security, just because, you know, because of, I guess because of 9/11. So people ever since then have been afraid of, you know, seeing a similar series of events unfold, where in, you know, an airplane or a passenger vehicle would get I guess taken over. And now we look at this and we see that, you know, there's been more than a few of these type of events, where this one was at a concert in Las Vegas, and there's been a few other ones at concerts where I know there was one, I believe it was in England somewhere. I don't know if it was London or not, but there was at a concert there. I think it was an artist named Ariana Grande, after one of her concerts, and then this person was able to bring all of these weapons into a hotel, So there's that aspect of it. So are we going to be seeing more of a security presence at hotels, at least that are high traffic in busy areas like Las Vegas, I guess? That's question number one. And I think question number two is just, what if anything, what's the appropriate response to this, as far as along the lines of gun control, I guess. So that's my question number two. I just wanted to hear your take on so the security number one and the gun control number two.
I don't know. I think as far as security goes, it's going to have similar effects, I think, in the long run. It's a lot like I'm trying to remember which episode it was that we talked about the Overton window. If any of you don't remember the Overton window, it's this idea that within the conversation realm, we have a set spectrum of what we're allowed to talk about. Some of them are fringe on one side, fringe on the other, and in the middle, there's kind of this window of acceptable discourse that people are allowed to talk about and kind of bounce ideas around, and it's still considered socially acceptable. And it has its natural ebbs and flows. It moves every now and then, but occasionally major events happen that kind of shake everything up, and it makes the window jump one way or another. And 9/11, for instance, was one of those events that happened. So, one of them was, like, for instance, before 9/11, we would go to the airport and you could walk up to the gate and, with your friends, and you could just kind of hang out with them until they left, and give them a hug or goodbye or whatever, and they would leave. And then you go to the airport. Now you can't get past security. You have to just, say your goodbyes before they go through security, and then they head out from there. And, back then it was like you might walk through a metal detector and then you go to your gate. Whereas now you have to go through a full body scanner. They got to search your bags. They got to do all this different stuff. And that's kind of what I mean by the shifting of the window. And I think that this is going to have a similar effect. And honestly, I feel a little bad because, on the night that it happened, I work overnights, for those of you who don't know. So the night that I was working, I saw a message pop up on the phone about, from, I think it was CNN or something, talking about the breaking news about the attack happening. And this was at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and the story came through. And so I kind of spent the rest of the evening following the story and just kind of hearing about what was going on. And it turned out that, as it was going on, I was reading the stories, I was reading the updates, I was seeing some of these videos, which those videos were crazy, man. Like the videos that were coming up from people's phones about, when the shooting started happening. And because, I heard that it was a shooting, I figured it was somebody in the crowd, but then you start to realize that this guy was perched up in a hotel somewhere. And it's just absolutely insane. I don't know. It was just one of those things where I saw it, and it made me really sad. 2, it made me really angry. And then it made me even more angry when not even 10 hours after the event happened, that people in the media started talking about, started politicizing it, talking about gun control and talking about all the usual stuff that they talk about during these things. But I feel like this is one of those events that it's big enough that it's going to really shape the way our security looks. Are we going to get to a point where we need to, are we going to have to go through metal detectors when we want to go to a grocery store, for instance? Are we going to have to start, expecting more of these cameras like the ones I was talking about? Chris, are you going to start seeing those little box of cameras floating around LA? Are you going to start seeing things like that? Because, you're in a bigger target than Columbia would be,
Yeah, who knows? Maybe those, when you were mentioning that, I was already thinking maybe those cameras are already there and they're just harder to pick out because it's just so dense here. But yeah, I would assume that those would either already be there or on their way in some shape or form.
Yeah, honestly, I think that I think we should expect it. I'm not entirely sure on. I think it's going to be one of those things where we're going to have to look at each thing individually and decide whether or not it's what we want, for our country, for our communities.
But I feel like what happened here is events like this almost make it they take the decision making out of the public's hands, in other words, the voters' hands, because well, hotels are private property, so it's up to the I would think it's up to the hotel owner, each individual hotel chain, et cetera, if they decide to do this at this point. I feel like maybe any type of legislation that would affect that, I don't know if that's even appropriate. Maybe you can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but any type of legislation that would call for that, I feel like that might be a little further off. Just that's just sort of my gut feeling. Like this was a big event, but it wasn't on the scale of what 9/11 was. So it's like, I feel like when 9/11 happened, just looking back, it was almost an overnight type of thing where you saw security at airports all over the place. And in this case, I think it might be a little bit of a slower adoption than that was. And again, I think that would be up to the discretion of each individual hotel chain, unless there was like some sort of legislation that needed to be, voted on or whatever. But I feel like, back to my point though, I feel like this takes the voting power out of it, because it's become politicized. It's been made political by the media, the news, as you mentioned. So it's almost like, well, if you don't go with this, if you think that it's wrong to have this type of security for your own protection, then you're just an immoral person. Because what type of person would be okay with someone, a madman with a gun, being able to go in to one of these places? So it's like the conversation inevitably gets driven there, and then people take sides, and inevitably it's like the right and the left, and the right people want more freedoms or whatever, and then the people on the left are like, no, let's just take that away, we don't need it anyways. On one side or the other, I guess.
So a couple of things. One, as far as the whole, just take those away, we don't need it. It's not. It is equally immoral for someone to say that you don't need whatever, you don't need this because I don't need this. Well, who are you to tell me what I need and what I don't need? For instance, that's the new
morality, though, I guess, is what I'm saying. So it's like the popular culture. I mean, I agree with you, but I feel like the popular culture, like sort of like the critical mass behind it, becomes, you're immoral if you don't agree with us.
Right, which is why I think the proper response, and I apologize for being kind of distracted. I'm dealing with a troll in the chat room here, but I feel like one of the things that we're going to have to really deal with as a society is we need to, I hate to use that word, but we almost have to coerce our fellow citizens to actually engage in a real thoughtful discussion that isn't just name calling and an assumed moral high ground that doesn't actually exist. Calling somebody immoral or whatever else, whatever term you want to use, just because they disagree with you doesn't make you a moral person or a good person. That makes you a jerk. And so, I mean, I get a little aggravated by it, just mostly because I've had to deal with it enough times to where I'm like, just because you don't understand why someone would want to have a right to privacy, for instance. We'll stick with privacy for now. We'll get to the whole gun thing in just a minute, because I know that's where we're going to end up. That's where everyone ends up on this stuff,
Yeah, inevitably, right?
But I mean, so for instance, privacy. Like, are the cameras good? Sure, the cameras are great. They do keep crime down. People are less likely to commit a crime if they are going to be filmed, because they're more likely to be caught. But I don't want cameras in my neighborhood. I don't want cameras pointed at my house. I don't want cameras pointed at my kids while they're outside playing. And then people are like, well, you must have something to hide. I'm like, no, I have nothing to hide. I just don't like prying eyes. Like, I have a right to privacy, and I respect your right to privacy as much as I wish that you'd respect my right to privacy. But, shifting to the whole gun control thing, because that's what it's all going to. And honestly, it didn't take but 10 to 12 hours for it to become an issue on Monday morning. And honestly, this has been one of those ones that's kind of got me thinking a little bit more. I'm very much pro Second Amendment, and I'm a constitutionalist. I'm pro every amendment, and at least the first 10. There's a few others after that, obviously, but I was not too fond of prohibition, but uh, the it's a joke, tough crowd. Anyways,
Sorry.
it's all right. We as far as the Second Amendment goes, as far as gun rights go, I enjoy guns. I enjoy shooting guns. I think they're a lot of fun. I've shot ARs. I don't have one. I've shot handguns. I've shot rifles, shotguns. They're just a lot of fun. But I like them because they're good for self-protection. I believe that everyone has a right to preserve their life and the safety of their family, and of their property. That I have a really hard time with people who are going to come out and say that we need to just get rid of all the guns because these things keep happening. Well, here's a newsflash for you. Even if you make guns illegal, the bad guys are still going to get them. And even if they can't get them, they're still going to stab people. They're still going to hit people with cars. They're going to do terrible other things. They're going to hit people with hammers. We see it happen in Europe. We see it happen in Australia. They got rid of all the guns over in England, and there's tons of stabbing attacks.
I mean, I agree with you. And for anyone who's watching out there, I am not a gun owner, but I do. So I don't have any firearms. I have some pocket knives. That's about the extent of my weaponry. And if I have a baseball bat in case anybody breaks into my house and tries to attack my wife or my kids, self-defense type stuff. I don't have any guns, but I'm not against having them. And I think that it's fine to, what you mentioned as far as like having them around. I don't see a problem with it. One way or the other, I think that people should be free to choose what they want and how they want to live. And I think you brought up a really good point about just, sort of like banning weapons. And I've heard the argument said, and it comes up every time an attack like this happens, that we should just ban, assault weapons or whatever they're calling it now, whatever the latest term for it is, because why would anybody need those? And I think to your point, even if you did ban that type of stuff, the bad guys are still going to get it. And this guy, who happened to be a multimillionaire, so he had very, very deep resources to buy this stuff, had illegal modifications on his weapons. So I think they called it a bump stop modification. So and I'm not familiar with the technical terms of that, but from what I read and understand, it means that the gun can just basically fire an insane amount of rounds in a very short period of time. So it's like, and I know for a fact that you can make those same type of modifications to handguns. So you can actually make handguns. And I'm not a gun person. Again, like I feel like I covered that already, but I know from even playing video games that you can modify handguns to shoot really fast and shoot a lot of bullets without stopping. So to the point, it's like you can ban one thing and try to keep people safe, but it's not really going to have the desired effect. It's like the truck attacks that happened in Europe. What you're going to ban trucks? Are you going to ban vehicles, motor vehicles? Are you going to not allow? How are you going to monitor who gets into a vehicle and who doesn't? I mean, how are you going to give licenses? How are you going to determine if somebody's going to go crazy? Apparently, this guy who had this attack in Vegas appeared completely normal to everyone, including his closest family. Nobody saw it coming. So how do you even begin to look at that? It's just somebody that went crazy and did something super ridiculously crazy, and people's lives were lost. But the point that, and now I'm kind of getting to the point that I wanted to make with the hotels and sort of the security, but what does it accomplish to have heavier security at these areas? Is it an appropriate response even? And I think that's up for debate, but honestly, I mean, I don't know that having tighter security at a hotel is going to really be able to stop this stuff from happening. Because what happens next time is maybe hotel security is too tight, but the next guy who does this type of attack, whoever that is or wherever he is, goes on top of a warehouse or finds another secret, goes into a church steeple or just a high place that's hidden and decides to do that. You can't ban this stuff. You can't stop it from a crazy person from finding a way you know, the saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. So it's like, you know, it's gonna these type of events are still gonna happen, even if you tighten hotel security, even if you do make these type of gun restrictions and regulations. You know, similar to prohibition in the 1920s, people still drank alcohol. They just did it, you know, had to go through a lot more trouble because they wanted to do it. You know what I'm saying? So I guess the point I feel that is most important here is like we're having this discussion about gun control and security, but do those things really fix the problem, or is it just a band-aid that you're going to have to keep putting more band-aids on every time something happens?
All right, so I've had a few thoughts in the time you were thinking. I tried really hard not to interrupt. It was very difficult. Okay, so a few things. One, this guy, or one, I refuse to say his name. Two, I refuse to call him a shooter because as someone who likes to go shooting as an amateur shooter, he's not a shooter. He's a murderer. He's a mass murderer, if you will. But he was not crazy with the amount of planning he did. They said that they recently found. Well, he cased it out. He had handwritten notes in there, planning, you know, doing the math for the trajectory for, you know, because the bullets are going to drop and they're going to lower. So he planned all this very, very well. He cased out other events in Boston and Chicago. He checked all these other things. He was not crazy. He was very meticulous, and it was evil. I don't know what. I would love to find out what his motive was.
That's an interesting point.
But I mean, I that to me does not say crazy. That just says evil. Like he had evil intent in his heart, and he found a way to do it. But second of all, you know, on your point of, you know, banning things and people are going to find whatever they can to do harm. Norway is one of those countries that I believe has a full gun ban. And oftentimes we forget about this, but there was a guy named Anders Breivik this was back in, I think, 2011. It's amazing how quickly we can forget about these things and act like, and it bothers me when people say that this is a uniquely American problem, because it's not, and it does a disservice to all the people around the world who are getting killed in these attacks that are similar to ours. And honestly, I think the attack in Norway was deadlier than the attack here. I mean, they're both awful, obviously, but this guy, he set off either a truck bomb or a van bomb in downtown Oslo that killed like 8 people. And then he went to a summer camp for kids and he killed 60 more.
That's right.
You know, and that was just a few years ago, and yet we've forgotten about it. And we like to say this is a uniquely American problem. But, you know, going back to what you mentioned, you know, the illegal modifications to make them fully automatic, the weapons themselves were, as far as I understand, were AR-15s or AR-10s. I can't remember which, but they were modified. But the modifications were not illegal. They were legal modifications.
So now, bump stop or whatever that's called is legal?
It's legal because it doesn't change the mechanics of the gun. It's an accessory for the outside part of the gun. And what it does is it causes your finger to stop at a certain period so that the recoil of the gun, as the gun bounces back and forth, it pulls the trigger for you, which allows it to fire off far more rapidly than you could do with your own finger.
Because okay, so that's interesting to know. Because I read somewhere that makes the gun fully automatic. Is that true?
It's not quite fully automatic. It accelerates the rapid fire capabilities, but it's not fully automatic. Because for instance, for anyone to buy or sell a fully automatic weapon, you have to have a Class 3 federal license. I can't remember the exact. It's on my Twitter feed. It's of the classification of it. I actually had a conversation about this with a guy from Arizona who kind of got into it a little bit about the technicalities, and he corrected me on it, and I was like, okay, yeah, he's legit. He's right. So I actually thought the same thing you thought originally. So thanks to I can't remember the guy's name, but thanks to whoever it was on Twitter who corrected me. But bump stops are bump stocks are legal, but that's kind of what I've been thinking a lot about lately. Like, as somebody who values individual liberty and choice, my principled reaction would be people have a right to buy what they want to buy. It's legal to own these things. Let people own them. Seeing what this guy did with those weapons, though, it's like, okay, is there an actual need aside? I mean, from a hobbyist perspective, yeah, it's tons of fun to shoot that fast. but at the same time, like, you can take an AR hunting and it will work fine. You know, it just depends on what you're shooting at. Like everyone wants to come out there and say, like, if you take an AR hunting that you're just gonna be like going full on, like Full Metal Jacket or something on a deer and just, you know, rip it to shreds. And that's not the case. You know, it's
modes in those.
Yeah, they're semi-automatic, one trigger pull, one shot. And so what it's going to do is it's going to, you know, if it depends on your placement, it depends on the size of the animal you're hunting, but you can hunt with an AR-15. It's not a problem, especially if you can get like a higher caliber one.
Yeah.
But you know, with the bump stock, is it necessary? Like, is there any real need for it aside from just sport shooting and enjoyment? I mean, that's kind of what I've been wrestling with.
Right? I would say no. I can't think of
I would say no as well. And
unless you're defending your, you know, it's like the apocalypse and, you know, you got to defend your house or something. I don't know. But other than that, no.
Yeah. I mean, well, and the other thing too is that, you know, it kind of begs the question about magazine capacity. So a few years back, the high capacity magazine ban was lifted. I think it was in like 07 or 08 or something. I can't remember exactly when.
Not in California.
No, not in California. No. In all the good places. Sorry. But it, you know, before that, it was a magazine capacity of 10 rounds, no matter what. So you'd have guys pulling up and with their ARs that could only fire 10 rounds, you know. A typical M16 or M4, or which those two, by the way, you have to have the Class 3 license for. But for an AR, you can just get it. But those usually hold 30-round magazines. This guy was rolling out with 60-round and 100-round magazines. So he came prepared to do some serious damage.
Exactly. And well, he knew what he was going to do. I mean, when the news broke for that, I was like, that guy had to have had a ton of guns preloaded with preloaded ammunition and like massive, you know, whatever they call that, the thing that holds the bullets. But yeah, it holds a lot of bullets, basically. Super technical here, but that was my immediate thought too. And the thing is like, okay, so California still has that ban that you're referring to, so you can only have I think a 10-round magazine, and but somebody can bring that in from out of state, like, you know, they're not checking, like, you know what I mean, like, who's checking, who's policing all that stuff? You can't, unless, yeah. So that brings up another question: should they do that? And how would they know? Like, you have to declare your gun at the border of the state, and then there's like state border security, like you're crossing into Mexico or something. Like, I don't know if you ever been down to those borders, but there's like, you got to go through sections where they basically stop you and they kind of peek into your car. There's some of those in Arizona too, just areas where it's closer to the border, and there tends to be more immigration, extracurricular immigration.
Is that the term you're using?
I'll call it that. So they like kind of like, I remember driving through Arizona and they kind of peeked in my car, and the guy like shined his flashlight. It was nighttime, and he's like, okay, you can, you know, move along. But it's like, when you talk about preventing the preventative measures to this sort of thing, it always sort of goes in that same direction of like less freedoms, less privacy, less less freedom and privacy. And, you know, how much of it's just really hard to say. I mean, you know, I don't know, that's just really frustrating, because it's like, at the same time, you want to prevent things like this from happening, but you know that the safeguards that will be put in place and have already been put in place are clearly not good enough to stop these events from happening. And I guess the thing I just keep coming back to is like, people, you can't get inside the mind of the individual person to understand where they are, if they're in a bad place. And you can't just assume that everybody is bad and just throw all this security out there. Like, how many times have people been stopped trying to bring something on an airplane at airport security where they were planning on blowing it up? I mean, I'm not aware of very many of those. Perhaps they just don't report them and it gets swept under the rug and the CIA takes care of that stuff. I don't know. But you don't hear about that sort of thing. Oh, today a guy was stopped at the airport trying to bring C4 onto an airplane. You don't hear about that. And I'm sure if somebody tried to do that, it would be making news. Or like a homemade explosive. And just one more thing, but when you were mentioning the Oslo or the Norway shooter or killer, the guy who went to that summer camp, it also made me think of like other forms that people have used for destruction. Obviously, when you look at there's lots of other ways to cause terrorism, and I went back to my mind went back to the Oklahoma City bombing and how many people died in that event. I mean, it was hundreds of people died. So we have hundreds of people injured and about 60 people killed in this Las Vegas incident. But when you look at an event like that Oklahoma City bombing, that was hundreds of people that were killed. That building was destroyed by a bomb made by things that you can't make illegal.
Yeah. Like
regular household things you can find around the house. To blow a building, he made an extremely powerful bomb, drove into a parking lot where, like, what are you going to have, like, security and scan every single vehicle that comes through into the underground parking lot? It's just not feasible, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You take away guns, you take away knives, you take away alcohol, you take away cigarettes, you take away all these bad things, people are still going to find ways to kill people and kill themselves at the end of the day. That's just how it's going to be. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but I feel like this is something, these type of events are not going to be stopped by legal measures and security and control and preventative measures. They may be lessened, they may be mitigated somewhat. You may get a little difficult for a little bit, but anybody who wants to commit an act of terrorism will commit an act of terrorism and will figure out a way to do it.
I agree. I think that the thing is that people are going to approach this with the hope of finding a way to stop it through, using some sort of government or policing method that's going to, remove more more ability for people to live their lives the way they want to live them because we need more security. But the problem is that we can set up as many laws and policies as we want. We can ban all the weapons we want. We can do all these things, but ultimately behind it is it's a heart issue. It's a human issue. And, as long as, I don't know.
That's sort of where I was getting at too. I didn't really, sorry. That's sort of where I was getting at too. And I didn't really say it, but yeah, I completely 100% agree with you. It's a heart issue. It's a mind issue. And, it's an ideology issue, whatever ideology. It doesn't matter where it comes from. You can have a Christian ideology or think you have a Christian ideology that says, you need to like get rid of these people and cause them harm. That's what I mean. Like any ideology that wants to cause harm to another human being, that's not good, but that's the end of it. Like, or that's sort of like the root of it, I think, is people's hearts and their minds get to become in a place where it's not a good place, I guess. Sort of butchered that, but I think you get my meaning. And I mean, I don't want to like make this sound like really trite or anything like that, but it's just, if we really want to see improvement in society, we have to come together and we have to unite. And I think that's important. So these messages of unity that we're seeing are important, but it can't stop there. Unity in and of itself is not enough to prevent these things from happening, because you're always going to have outliers. There's always going to be people who don't subscribe to that, no matter what you try to do or how much you sugarcoat unity and say, oh, this is such a great thing. You're going to have people that rebel against that and don't agree with that, because your mind is, there's always, you may have all your freedoms taken away, but your mind will always be free, in the sense that you can have whatever thoughts you want, at least for the time being. I'll leave that there, but yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a heart issue. I think it's a mind issue. and that's where it's got to be dealt with. It cannot be dealt with external means, and certainly not by rules and regulations that are passed, because that's just, as I mentioned earlier, just putting a Band-Aid over a wound, waiting and expecting for another one to happen, and just doing the same thing over and over again.
I think that the idea of unity is good, and I don't know, I'm definitely an advocate for it. But the thing is that there's this weird mentality that people seem to have nowadays, where unity automatically means that you have to agree with something that you have to agree on every single point all the way, and that's not what it is. We can stand united on a common issue. For instance, I'll just give you an abstract example. In Colombia, there are tons of churches all over the place. Most of them are Protestant evangelical churches, some Baptist, some Lutheran, some Presbyterian, things like that, some non-denominational. But there's also, some Catholic churches, there's some Jewish synagogues, there's some mosques and stuff like that. And 99% of those houses of worship, like, a lot of times there's a lot of things that we disagree on, but there's a handful of things that we will wholeheartedly agree on with one another and on principle. But it's like take abortion, for example. There are certain denominations within Christianity and within Judaism, I don't know about Islam. I think Islam's a bit more strict on it. Excuse me. But there's there's a handful that'll say that it's okay, in either all circumstances or in certain circumstances. But generally speaking, the vast majority of Christians, including Catholics, especially Catholics are really strong on abortion. But most Jews, most Muslims will agree that that's wrong and that we should stand against it. And but it's funny because you never see really any unity. Like the people you always see sitting outside of abortion clinics, either protesting or trying to pray for people, are usually the Catholics. They're really good about being out there and trying to offer alternatives. And occasionally you'll see some evangelicals out there as well. But there's no reason why we couldn't have, the community of believers in Jesus and the community of Muslims and Jews all coming together on that one issue, kind of standing united in that, showing that we disagree on so many different issues, but this is an issue that we all agree on, that we all believe is wrong, that we all believe is harmful for the mother as well as the child, obviously the child. But, we could stand together on this, and I don't see why this is any different, I think that the one thing that I remember that I think I really took away from everything that happened this past Sunday and Monday with the shooting in Las Vegas was that all this crap about football players taking a knee and all this crap about, Donald Trump tweeted this or was there Russian collusion, or the Democrats said this or whatever, or Elizabeth Warren shot her mouth off about this, or Bernie Sanders said this outrageous statement about finances or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's all stupid and it's all meaningless in the end. And I think that's why it made me so mad when it got politicized so quickly, because there was no need for it. And there was, there's a chance that we could have all kind of seen this and kind of come together as an American people, kind of like what happened with Houston after Hurricane Harvey came through. But inevitably, even then, there was, I think it was an article from Salon. This woman wrote about how we're not actually good people. We don't really care about each other. This is, Houston isn't an example of people coming together to help each other. This is an example of racism. And I'm like, no, just people are stupid. They're going to find something to complain about no matter what. But
Salon, that's why. They love to write controversial stuff. They know it's controversial too, but
yeah, it's a bag of excrement is what it is. Anyways, but I think that the cause of unity is a noble one, and I think it's something that we should pursue. And I think it's gonna be hard though, because people don't necessarily want to come together. They feel a natural need to run to their respective corners and to, for their whatever the issue is, whether it be gun rights or whatever, or gun control. And then they're going to just go to their corners. And then as soon as the bell rings for it, they're going to come out swinging. And it's a shame. It's a real shame.
I heard an interesting take on that, the NFL business. And, I watch I watch football. I've been through different phases where I've been more religious about it, I guess, where I would watch a lot of games, and it was directly correlated to my fantasy involvement, my involvement with fantasy football. So the more fantasy football I played, the more football I wanted to watch because I wanted to see how my players were doing. But that's sort of beside the point. Initially seeing how this NFL kneeling at the national anthem began. Obviously, we know it started with this quarterback, second string quarterback, former starting quarterback named Colin Kaepernick, who did it last year and sort of popularized it. And ostensibly, it was to raise awareness of police brutality. So that was sort of like the original, his quoted original purpose for it. But it feels, it's very interesting how the sort of narrative behind that has changed, and it became about racism and things like that. There's been a lot. So and it depends on who you speak to, what the narrative is there. So some people will tell you that it's racism. Some people will tell you it's an affront to Trump, so that he, it could just flip him the bird basically and say, forget you. You can't tell us what to do, basically. But I did hear an interesting take on this, and I haven't been able to verify the truthfulness of it. But this was actually from the Joe Rogan Experience, one of his shows, his more recent shows, and they were talking about this, the kneeling at the national anthem, and he said, or his guest said, that it only was more recent where they would actually started making people stand for the national anthem and during games and players and such. And I guess apparently that was some sort of a contractual obligation that the United States, like the Army, et cetera, had with the NFL. Again, I haven't really fact checked that or anything. This guy sort of just said that on there, and I was like, whoa, wait a second. So you mean the NFL players are contractually obligated to stand? So I don't know how true that is, but that was a very interesting take. And the guy was basically like saying that, that they didn't even televise the national anthem before this controversy happened. And I thought to myself, you know what? I remember watching plenty of football games where I saw the national anthem in the beginning. It's not uncommon. Mm-hmm. He was kind of like of the mind that it only happened during the Super Bowl and big games like that. I was like, well, no, I don't think so. And then whenever you go to a baseball game, they do the national anthem. Basketball games, they do the national anthem. Nobody's required to stand and put their hand over their heart or anything like that if you're in the crowd. Obviously, I mean, you look around and you see people from all walks of life, and they choose to observe the national anthem and respect the fallen for our country in different ways. But nobody's policing them to say, walking down the aisles and looking to see who's like, raising their hand for raising their hand, putting their hand over the standing and putting their hand over their heart with their hat off. But I think the optics of this with the NFL are not good because of how visible it is to the public. I think my perspective on it is, I mean, I've never been in the armed forces. My dad was in the Navy. My stepdad was a Marine, and neither of them, that to my knowledge, were involved in active combat. But I've always had this respect for those institutions and the people who served in them and who gave their lives, particularly during the world wars, and where there was really truly evil that was trying to take everything over. As far as like some of the other wars that we fought in, such as the Persian Gulf, etc., where we've actually gone in, I feel differently about those wars themselves. But the people who gave their lives during all of those wars, did it for a reason, because they believed in something. They believe that the flag of the United States and the United States itself is a symbol of freedom, is a beacon of hope to people. There's a reason why people from other countries and in all walks of life want to come to the United States, and it's because there's great opportunities here to be successful and to be free and to do what you want and to live how you want. And I think that's fantastic. But people died for those rights, and I feel like there's some sign of respect for that is important. Whether you put your hand over your heart or you stand up or you sit down, I think that's an outward display of it, you know, an outward display of respect. But we mentioned earlier that, you know, it's more about the heart of an issue. So it's like you could be sitting down and your heart's completely in respect to those soldiers who gave their lives. But I feel like the optics of it at the NFL is just wrong.
Yeah, I think it's wrong. There's actually a law about the national anthem. If anyone's interested in looking it up, I'll put a link in the show notes to it. But it's 36 U.S. Code subsection 301, and it's a whole section dedicated to the national anthem and the protocols for doing it. So like when the flag is displayed, how to do it. You know, there's rules for the military, for people, you know, people in military dress, for average citizens, like how we're supposed to do it. And it talks about that, you know, that you know, for us, like as non-military personnel, that we should stand and face the flag, to stand at attention with the right hand over our heart. So it's actually law. Yeah, anyway, it's on there. I'll put a link in the show note for it. I don't really know what else to say, but like as far as the whole standing and kneeling thing, I mean, it sort of bothers me just because I'm like, I wish that we could just keep politics out of something, because I'm really tired of politics infiltrating every aspect of life at this point. But I mean, I don't really watch football, so I don't really have a dog in the fight. I know a lot of people are really upset about it because they love football. But I've never been a big football guy. I've always been more of a baseball fan. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, and this guy, in this interview that I heard too, was kind of like sort of minimizing it as well, just saying, you know, people go to the a lot of people go to the bathroom during the national anthem, you know, that sort of stuff. And I 100% agree with you. I don't like that fact that it's been politicized. And I remember as a kid, you know, I didn't even grow up in the United States. I was born in Canada, and my family moved back to the United States for a short period of time when I was very, very little, like less than 3 years old. And then with that point, we moved to Greece, and we lived there until I was about 9 years old, and we came back to the United States. But I can still remember, you know, we would stand for the national anthem, or stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag in the morning for school. And I remember anytime the national anthem was played, or like the Star Spangled Banner, I would just feel this sense of belonging and pride in this country and what it represents. And I remember being overcome by emotions a lot of times. Like I would, you know, when the national anthem was played and somebody was singing it, and you could just feel it. There was just something about it, and it would and I would just get emotional. I'm not saying I would just like start crying, but I would feel it. And you look at sporting events and you see players on the sidelines that get overcome in that way. Not everybody does, and there's nothing wrong with it if you don't. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I can't put a finger on why I would get emotional exactly, but I just feel like there's just something about this country. There's something about this nation that's just special, you know, and that sets it apart from other countries in the earth. And why wouldn't you want to respect the flag, which is just a sheet of canvas, but it's what it represents. It's who it represents. It's the blood. It's the people who died. That's what it represents. It's the freedoms that we have, that we take for granted every day, that people in other countries don't have, people in China don't have, people in North Korea don't have, you know, and we're able to think freely. It's what it represents that I respect, that I love about it. And if people don't want to respect it, or you know, they want to respect it in their own way, that's really up to them. And I'm not going to criticize anybody for you know, wanting to do it in their own way. I certainly won't, because it's like, you know, I have my own problems too. But at the same time, it just feels wrong. You know, it doesn't feel right that people would do this. And like you're saying, it is a law. I didn't know that. But it just bothers me. Like, I don't know why. Like, it just bothers me to my core. It just feels like, why would you do that? Why would you like step like verbally, physically, like what do you call it? I'm struggling for words here, but figuratively step on the flag like that, step on what this country represents like that, by trying to make a message about how people aren't in unity, and how, you know, it's political, or it's racial, or what, insert whatever, you know, cause you want to here, you know. And I think if you were to ask or poll, you know, 100 of those NFL players that participated in one way or another with those protests, if you want to, if you know, as they're being called, that you'd probably get, I don't know, like 50, probably 50 different answers, if not 100 different answers. Just like, people, well, why are you doing this? Like, why did you do what you do? And they probably couldn't tell you, you know, or give you the same reason. So it's like, there's not even unity, true unity, in the very protest that they're saying is for unity. Everybody stands there physically with their arms locked, but what does that mean?
I think that's just sort of, we're standing up against the president saying something, because he really, I mean, honestly, he didn't have any business saying anything about it.
No, and I agree.
I
was way off. That was pretty low. I was like, sorry to cut you off, but I think at that point I was like, get him off Twitter. You know, just don't be on Twitter, please.
That wasn't even on Twitter. That was he was at like a rally or something, or a speech, and
okay, you know, but he had some tweets that were I guess retweeted by like LeBron James and some other, you know, Steph Curry, and there was that whole incident too.
Oh, I don't even care anymore. I'm so over this whole Twitter president thing. But you know, you brought up the idea of what it represents, and kind of, I don't know, you didn't actually use the term, but you know, you're kind of talking about the idea of American exceptionalism, and that's something that I've struggled with for a long time, as far as, you know, this idea of the Republican neoconservative kind of view of America as like this exceptional place that's the best country in the world because freedom, you know, and whatever that really meant. And while I agree we're not the best at everything, it was interesting, actually, maybe even providential, with the conversation the way it's gone tonight. When I was putting my oldest son to bed tonight, you know, he's 9, and he was asking some questions. We were talking about government stuff, because he knows it's what I'm in school for, and he just had some questions and stuff like that. So he was asking me about the Constitution, because this past summer we had gone to Washington and kind of saw the sites and everything. We went to the National Archives, so we got to go up and see the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and like in their armored cases. And it was interesting though, because he's asked me to explain the Bill of Rights and what they are, like, what does it mean and what do they stand for. And so I'm going through them, and I'm explaining, you know, this is what this, you know, the First Amendment gives us these rights, the Second Amendment has these rights, Third Amendment these rights, and every one he asked why, you know, trying to understand, well, why is that, like, what does that mean, why is that there? And I actually had to stop and I had to explain it to him, and I was like, we are kind of a unique place, because like with every example I gave him, like, you know, we give the historical context of the British obviously used to, you know, as far as like quartering, or, you know, taking away people's right to defend themselves, taking away people's right to speak speak freely what they think and feel. Like even this troller in the chat room who spent the good little bit of time there sending some nasty messages our way just because he's trying to get a rise out of us. You know, he's got a right to say what he wants to say, and you know, I'll report it for harassment and stuff like that. But you know, if you want to come in here and you want to have you know, actually ask a question, have a conversation, I'll be happy to talk with you about whatever. But you know, I had to explain to him, like, even today, and you go to Canada or you go to Norway or you go to England or France, there's certain things you cannot say. And if you say them, you'll get arrested, or at least a really hefty fine. You know, you go to Saudi Arabia, and, you know, if I was, for instance, you know, if I was there on business or something, and I was walking down the street, and or I went to a coffee shop or something, and, you know, just in passing, you know, said something to you know, a woman who was walking by, or, you know, a woman sitting there, she talks to a man who's walking by, you can get arrested for that by by the religious police, the moral police. You know, there's places all over the world that do things in a way that we would not want them done to us. And I feel like, maybe that's a good way to explain it, is that because I don't know, I never really got emotional, during the national anthem kind of thing, but there is that kind of sense of like, epic prideness, like not pride in like, as far as, what the Bible would describe as pride being bad, but you take comfort in knowing that, you have these certain unalienable rights that belong to you naturally, and they're not rights that are given to you by government, but by the Creator. And I think it kind of was an interesting way to kind of approach the topic tonight, was, having to explain it to a 9-year-old in a way that he would understand why we have the Bill of Rights and why it's significant and why it's important. And then having to explain why, because, for us, I think it's just kind of common sense. It's kind of just, it's there. It's what we have. It's what we've always known, but having to explain, well, we have it this way. Well, no, it's not like that in every other country. In fact, there's a lot of countries that do it differently and who do it bad, but
yeah, that's all it is. It's not to say that we, people in this country or the founding fathers didn't make mistakes or do things differently than what's done today. I find it interesting that, people are holding, people that lived 300, 400 years ago to the standards of what we have today, historically going like, this person owned slaves. Did you know that? Let's take his statue down. It's like, because of what he did. And yeah, go ahead and do that if if that floats your boat. But, you cannot, moral standards change, as we're seeing that happen at a very rapid pace, even, in this day and time. I feel like moral standards are kind of a very fluid thing. Depending on who you talk to, you'll get different answers regarding all this stuff, all of these issues. But I find it ironic that, people who make more money than, the average person in the United States who watches a sports event, they make more money in a single game for 2-3 hours of service than many of these people make in a single year. So, I went ahead and did a little bit of research. I think the last time we talked, we brought this subject up, but we found out that the base salary, if you divide the base salary for an entry-level person who was drafted in the 7th round of the NFL draft, they're a rookie this year, the base lowest salary you can get in the NFL is somewhere around $500,000. I think it might be a little less than that. It's like $445 or something like that. But when you divide that number by 16 games, so the NFL season is 16 games, you come out to a number just under $30,000. So you have people who the poorest NFL player that's out there on the field kneeling down, trying to tell us how to be moral and tell us, to be unified and all that, makes more money in 2 hours than a lot of people make in a single year, in this country where we are blessed. That's
more than I make all year.
You have these people essentially being our trying to tell us, through their actions that this is how we should behave, when they're so far removed from reality that they can't even tell. Like, how, it's just so ironic. How can somebody that far removed from reality, like, you're making $30,000 in 2 hours, you're going to go buy a car after this, you're going to go buy a house, for your friend, you're going to go do this. But your reality is different than my reality, Mr. NFL player. Your reality is different than my neighbor's reality. Your reality is different than my CEO's reality. Okay, so for you to try to, tell me how to behave through your actions and kneel down and say we need to be more unified and we need to, do this and that, and we're talking about people's rights here. It's like, why don't you take a look in the mirror and realize the irony of someone who makes the amount of money you make and try to tell us what to do? And you see that with all of these celebrities, not just NFL players. And I don't mean to just call out NFL players, because they're actually on the bottom end of the totem pole when it comes to the amount of money being made in sports. They're actually underpaid compared to other sports such as soccer, basketball, and baseball. And then, you look at those players, just these mega $1 million contracts. It's just insane. And then you have celebrities trying to be our little moral compass, our little angel on our shoulder, telling us, how to live, and that we should let all of these immigrants or people in, which I think is fine if you want to let people into the country, but just be careful about how you let them in and be secure. But they would say, let everybody in, and while you're at it, why don't you let them stay at their house, at your house? So it's like the irony of it is just ridiculous. I think, somebody who makes tens of millions of dollars a year trying to say, trying to tell us to let people into our houses. Well, why don't you be the example and go ahead and let these people into your mansions? Why don't you buy a few houses and get some people situated that are coming, that are coming through that are less fortunate? Why don't you just start there? And for these NFL players and for any sports figures for that matter, who feel the need to kneel and disrespect the people who've died for our country and what our flag and what our country represents, which is a great thing, even in view and in light of the mistakes that have been made in the past hundreds of years. Why don't you go use your money, your millions of dollars, your $30,000 game check, and go support a cause that actually does something, instead of standing out there and not even being able to put into words what you're actually standing for? Sorry, I ranted there, but it's just, I kind of got a little fired up.
I'm not complaining. I'm always up for a good little rant. But, the same thing could be said as far as the gun control argument goes. A lot of these politicians and a lot of these celebrities come out saying these things. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't we start by taking all the guns away from your security detail, and then you can go around completely unprotected like you want to make all of us, and then we can talk. But, of course, it's not going to happen because they're important. They're special. But anyways, also, side note, as far as the national anthem goes, I'm going to put a link in the show notes once I find it. But it's one of my favorite renditions of the national anthem ever. It's performed at like some little local baseball game by Ben Burnley from Breaking Benjamin. It's great. It's fantastic.
Isn't he like kind of like a heavy metal singer?
Yeah, I don't know if I say heavy metal, but he's definitely like a hard rock. Maybe a little edgier than just regular rock music.
Yeah, and let's put that link, or a link to the national anthem, or as far as the Pledge of Allegiance, or what you were talking about as far as the law regarding that. Okay. Let's put that in the show notes as well for people, just to to reference that. That was pretty interesting to hear about that as well.
Yeah, I can do that. And there's actually a whole section on the flag code as well, like with what you're supposed to do with the flag, how you're supposed to treat it, how you're supposed to. And honestly, that's a law that we all break all the time too. Like one of the things is the flag should never be used as an adornment for clothing or something like that. And how many guys you see running around wearing flag board shorts at the beach, or wearing a flag T-shirt on the 4th of July, just things like that. And it's just, we're not supposed to do it, but we all do it anyway. So that's why, the law is interesting. It doesn't really have a whole lot of credence to it, but
still
yeah,
very.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Speaking of interesting, though, did you hear about the guy in Wyoming who got arrested because he was apparently warning everybody that aliens are invading next year?
I did not hear about that.
I did. I was gonna screen share it, but apparently Chrome doesn't want to work, so I'm not going to do that. But it was this guy. He said that he came back from the year 2048, and he was here to warn the world, starting with this little town, and I think it was Casper, Wyoming, was the town, and he he was coming back to let us all know the aliens are coming next year, and we need to prepare. And when they tested him, that he had a higher than legally allowed blood alcohol level. And his reasoning for that was because apparently that was the only way to transport through time, was to stand on this special transporter pad and then fill yourself with alcohol.
So special transporter pad being a bar stool?
I guess so.
That kind of stuff trips me out, though, because it's like, I mean, maybe I've watched too many movies or something, but it trips me out because you're like, this guy says and he probably didn't, but this guy says he came from 2048. It's like, what if somebody really did? How would we really respond to that? And if they had brought some sort of message back, that just, I don't know, kind of twists my mind a little bit. But I'm like, man, would we listen to that person?
Well, clearly we're not listening to them. So now what are we going to do? Like, this is why we can't take away guns from people, because we're going to need them to fight the aliens.
Exactly. Like, yeah. What if he was telling the truth, that you do have to have some sort of an alcohol content to time travel? Who knows? Maybe it's like something about the laws of physics.
I know some people who would be very well off in time travel.
Yeah, me too.
So, but But Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about tonight?
No, I think I ranted enough, and I'm sure I said some things in there along the way that were like not the greatest, or I might want to take back, but that can be dealt with at another time. But we all have. I think the bottom line is we all have our beliefs and things, and we don't. Dan and I don't agree on everything. We certainly don't, and that you guys don't have to agree with us. We just are two wise guys who created a show, and to be able to speak our minds, and because we're able to do that in this country, if we have the freedom to be able to do that. If you disagree with us, let us know. I mean, let us know. We're not going to be mean about it. Please try to be civil. But also, if you really have a point of view that you feel like needs to be heard, I want to encourage you guys to do the same thing that we're doing, which is start a show or use your platform, whatever platform it is, and create something like that, to where you can get your message out that you feel is important. I think that's one of the great things about this country. That's one of the great things about the freedoms that we have here, and that we're able to do things like this, just like what we're doing right now.
I agree. I think it's a lot of fun too. So it's a lot of fun to even have these deep conversations that people don't always agree on. And I think me and Chris agreed on more things than usual tonight, which is fine. But
it was a little unusual. I was kind of like thrown off. Not thrown off, but I was like, Dan's agreeing with me.
Well, it's good. I think it'll be good. But and this episode went a lot longer than we were planning on originally. We tried to go for about an hour. It looks like we're going on 2, but it's the first one back since being away, so there's a lot to talk about. But so hopefully the next ones will be a little bit more restricted. But I'll probably on the podcast, I'll probably actually cut this one up and do multiple releases. So I think there were some good transitions in there. But if you guys don't enjoy the conversation, you are more than welcome to head over to twowiseguys.com/contacts, and you can send us an email that way, or you can send us a tweet on to the show, which is at Two Wise Guys Show, or to me in particular, which is at Reborn Jumpman. Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. There's a lot of stuff that's been going on here and around the world, and Lord knows it's not going to be stopping anytime soon. So. But yeah, if you guys also, just a little side note, if you guys are interested in the podcast, again, it's on iTunes or Apple Podcasts as they call it now. It's also up on Google Podcasts. So if you use Android and you prefer to just use the Google Podcasts app, you can use that as well. It's on Stitcher, SoundCloud, all those other big ones that are out there. And you can usually find it just through whatever one you're using. And if you guys were interested in supporting us, you can also go over to patreon.com/twowiseguys and join us there. We'll have monthly tiers on there. You can kind of join from as little as $1 a month, or there's different reward tiers that come along with it as well. So that's all I've got for this week. Chris, unless you got anything to add, I guess we will see everyone in 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's do it in 2 weeks. So that puts it at what, October 21st, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're real excited about it. It was a great show. Had a lot of fun bantering back and forth, just having our conversation. And yeah, I hope that for you guys out there, that it helped you or gave you, ideas to go research some stuff or look some stuff up for yourself. And as always, it's been a pleasure. And until next time, stay safe.
Bye-bye.